Hello everybody. So we're here today to talk a little bit about Metascience and to help you understand what Metascience is, what we understand by that term, why it matters, and basically in a nutshell just explain a little bit more about it. So my name's Helen Buckley Woods and I'm Senior Research Fellow at STEEP at UCL, and also I'm employed by RoRI, which is the Research on Research Institute, and our job is to conduct Metascience or research on research. And I'm here with our director, my colleague James.
Thank you, Helen. So, hello, James Wilsdon, Director of RoRI and Professor of Research Policy in STEEP. As Helen says, we run this thing called the Research on Research Institute, which sits inside STEEP, those of you who have seen the big RoRI banner in the office. And RoRI is part of this much bigger and fast growing community of academics, but also research funders, policymakers, people in publishing, infrastructure, even tech companies who are interested in this idea of using scientific methods, scientific techniques to improve the way that we design and run the science system itself. And that's really the nub of what Metascience is about. These terms, Metascience, there are other labels, meta-research, research on research, which is what we use in RoRI, science of science is another term. They have all risen in prominence in the past 10, 12 years. They all come from slightly different starting points, which I won't go into now. But essentially they all converge around that core single point that the science system, research system, should be making more use of the methods, the techniques, and the data that we do have already and certainly can gather if we put our minds to it, to inform how we organise science, how we fund science, how we evaluate science, how we communicate science, and we can do that better by thinking about those questions scientifically. I think it's important to say Metascience isn't new. I mean, the term has, I'd say, become more fashionable in a way recently, but it's certainly not new. In RoRI, we like to say that Metascience has deep roots. It's been around for a long time. There's lots of history to this, lots of other disciplines that have fed into what we're now calling Metascience in this context. It has deep roots. It also has many branches. There's lots of stuff going on across the research system, as I say, outside research itself in other related sectors and institutions that certainly we would consider to be Metascience. So it's not helpful to characterise this as a new thing, but deep roots, many branches, at the same time, to keep the analogy going, many new shoots. We're seeing lots of new stuff happening, some of which, or a fair bit of which, is actually using these terms, Metascience, some of which uses other terms but is Metascience in all but name. And so there is this sense of a sort of wave building. And we felt the force of that wave, I think, very visibly and powerfully back in the summer of 2025 when we at UCL hosted and convened this conference, Metascience 2025, which was not our conference. It's taken place a few times before. First time it's been in the UK or in Europe. But we saw in the level of interest in that meeting, it takes place every 2 years. The 2023 meeting, there'd been about 250 people. It took place in Washington. And 2025, London, 800 people, another 400 people who wanted to come but we couldn't fit in, 65 countries. And so you get this sense that there is something happening here that's quite exciting and quite interesting. And so
Just follow on from that, James, to say that at the conference there were people from all different aspects of the research system, and that's one thing I think is an interesting way to understand research on research, is to think about it in terms of communities and also in topics. So some people come at it because they're paid to be a researcher of research, and they might be from say higher education studies or work in psychology, or work in evidence-based practice, work in a discipline or a field that is basically designed to look at to do research, or they might be someone who is an academic in drama, for example, but then is very interested in open access or open science, so they come to it through that particular topic. So there's all kind of different communities, people who are paid to do it for the day job like us, or people who maybe work as a practitioner in funding or in publishing, or in all different kinds of organisations, who might be librarians, or who do some kind of research as part of their job, and also some people who kind of get the bug about a particular topic. They work within the science system, and then there's something that they think, I'm really interested in open access or a particular area, peer review, or something that just floats their boat, and then they get kind of come into it more of an advocate kind of way, kind of are interested in that sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And if we look at, we've done work on this ourselves in RoRI, in mapping the range of academic literatures that would constitute metascience. And you see, if you look at those literatures and you sort of layer them over a kind of map of science and research in terms of different disciplinary and clusters, social sciences, health, physical sciences, etc. You of course see a big concentration of published work in the places that you would expect, kind of traditional disciplinary areas of strength on these questions, whether that's, as Helen says, higher education studies, scientometrics, STS, innovation studies, etc. But you also, when you map it, see this incredible distribution of smaller pockets and concentrations of work happening that is metascience across the entire landscape. And most of the time, at least insofar as one can analyse this from afar, it is, as Helen says, it's people coming to these questions because they have encountered some problem or obstacle or frustration in the patch of science that they actually work in, and so they're bringing then the methods, the tools, the techniques that they have honed in their home areas, their main areas, their day job, if you like, and they're turning those now to both understand that problem or those problems in their immediate environment, and to try and reform and improve them. So there's a very strong, as it were, reformist agenda as well in a lot of this, in terms of improving the science system. I like to say, in that sense, for a lot of people, metascience is a side hustle. It's not their day job. It's something they do in the lab on a Friday afternoon when the main work's done, but they want to then work on why is it that so few early career researchers are getting a particular type of grant, or why is it that we've got a research assessment system in the UK that brings with it all of these different problems and frustrations. Can't we do it better? Let's look at the numbers, let's look at the data. And that makes it very exciting. I don't know, Helen, do you want to say a bit more about the methods? We talk about disciplines. I mean, is it a discipline? I mean, some people like think, is metascience a new discipline?
Well, having thought about this a lot, because that was the nub of my doctorate in higher education studies, where I looked at what a discipline actually is. You can see that I believe, and having looked at a lot of the literature in that area, that a discipline's an intellectual system that it basically has a coherent body of dynamic knowledge, but it's also a social system, but it has to have this theoretical underpinning, which you can clearly see in particular in established disciplines. But when people talk about metascience, it's basically so many different communities doing different things that some of them clearly are basically a field as part of an overarching discipline. So my doctorate was in higher education studies, that's a field that's part of the discipline of education. So you can see how that clearly fits. There's some things where it's like something that might be new, where it's not a discipline because it's something that's more pragmatic, so it's not got that underpinning basis, that theoretical basis. So it's someone saying, what's the problem? It's going to be really practical, and they're looking at a question, and then they're trying to fit the methods just to look at that. They're not thinking about conceptual framework and the theoretical underpinning and so on. So it's coming at it from a different point of view. So I would say that it's not a discipline. What's really useful is to think about it as a lens. So it's like so you can use any kind. I passionately believe you can use any kind of method to address a research question. You can use any type of method. So for example, if you look at the work at the Metric Centre at Stanford, very famous centre with John Ioannidis, big figure in the meta research world, and their methods are really about a health methods. The quantitative methods use a lot of systematic reviews, clear systematic reviews from that health field, which have been incredibly rigorous and have a set methodology that is used, very objective and so on. So it's that type of methods, and that's meta research, of course it is. So just as well is the work that you can see, for example, in the Society for Research in Higher Education Studies, this kind of close-up qualitative work that's addressing questions, problems in the higher education system, and then looking at very closely in a qualitative manner. All of these different methods, methodologies and study designs can be used because there's so many different questions, and it's just the same as any other kind of research. The method has to fit the question. It has to bring you back the evidence that you need. So I think it's very plural and very open, and that I'm very passionate about that we need to keep that.
Yeah.
That
well, I think
plural
RoRI
point
as a
of
whole.
view.
Yeah. I mean, this isn't the only view of Metascience, but certainly our view collectively across RoRI and the partners we work with is as Helen says, that this is something that's, in a way, it's unhelpful to categorise it in any sense as a discipline, because it's something far more exciting in a way than that. I mean, I think those particularly work in universities, becoming a discipline, is not necessarily these days the end point that it was perhaps in decades gone past. And we, in a sense, should relish the fact that Metascience doesn't display those sort of characteristics or trajectories. But that's that question. What else can we say, Helen?
We're also thinking about how Metascience is currently used by policymakers and the potential for use of this kind of analysis in the future.
Yes, good. So yeah, this is something that is kind of moving quickly. I won't give all the examples, but in the UK, which is perhaps the easiest example to start with, you've got a very tangible and visible example of the growing visibility of this concept and the communities around it in the form of the UK Metascience unit, which was set up and launched in 2024, so quite recently, as a joint venture of the Department for Science, Innovation and Technology, DSIT, so the Whitehall Ministry responsible for science and research, and UKRI, UK Research Innovation, the main research funder. So this unit sort of straddles those two entities with a mission to foster, fund, catalyse more meta-scientific work and analysis and the uptake of meta-scientific evidence within the running and design of the UK research system. It started small. I mean, the initial budget was quite modest, but very quickly, really, I mean, given it's only around, well, not even yet 2 years, it's had a real impact. It's doing some great stuff, lots of exciting experiments that they're trying out across the funding system. They've funded lots of interesting projects. I was fortunate to co-chair the funding panel for the first round of grants that they gave out to various projects across the system. And there's a great report, which I can flash up if you want, they're called A Year in Metascience, which you can get on the DSIT website easily enough, which gives an overview of what they've done. And there's also attached to that another report that we did, which talks about what Metascience is. So if you want more on that, then that's probably the best place to start. But the UK is only one example. Very recently, we're now going right bang up to date, end of November, just before Christmas, in the budget, the UK budget that came out from the government, there was a significant increase, 4 or 5-fold increase in the budget of the Metascience unit as a specified item in the science budget, reflecting really already the fact that the system the decision makers in it, the minister and key people who decide these things, can see the value of this work. They can see that the kind of projects and the kind of interventions that are being trialled are yielding quite rapid, valuable insights into how to improve science. I'll give a specific example. A project that we initiated in RoRI that then has been taken forward in a bigger way by the Metascience unit. We've been working in RoRI for a couple of years now with a big German foundation, the Volkswagen Foundation, to trial a method called distributed peer review in the review and evaluation of grant proposals. Without going into great detail, the essence of this is that, normally when you apply for a grant, go out to peer review, some random peer reviewer, and then it might come back into a panel. In this model, if you apply to that particular funding call, you also you have an obligation to be a reviewer of several others. And it creates a set of reciprocities within a particular grant call that lead to improvements on two fronts, both of which are big problems if you're a research funding organisation. Firstly, you get better quality reviewers because the people who are reviewing the proposals are themselves applicants. They are clearly at least competitively engaged in the field. Secondly, and this is probably the biggest factor of all, those reviewers will return their reviews on time. One of the biggest problems if you're a funding agency and also if you're a journal editor is people agree to review stuff. I confess I do this myself far too often, and then busyness, deadline, people delay, they're late delivering it, and that, if you're running a process, can of course slow the whole thing down. The initial results with Volkswagen Foundation that we've done show the introduction of that method can basically reduce the time from application to decision by about 50, 55, even 60%. So you can see, as just a simple intervention, the kind of efficiency gains that you're getting there from something that really isn't a big deal. Of course, it's not perfect. It can't be done in all calls. There are risks, you can imagine. What about people giving each other bad reviews? Well, and believe me, that's being thought about, and there are ways to kind of manage and hedge against that. But nonetheless, it's just a quick example of the kind of thing we're talking about here. It's kind of looking for ways to test, and if they work, to scale interventions that can improve the way we fund science. There are other things going on in many other countries, but I don't have time. We've been given, we've got 10 minutes, we're probably now over. Yeah,
our
Helen,
final
quickly.
question, why is Metascience important for the governance and funding of science? I would say, as a quick point, a lot of research is funded by public money, and there is something called, we know as like the contract between science and society, so it's about making research transparent so that the public know, how is my money being spent, and are the questions addressed important, are they relevant, and then the way this allows researchers to then have some autonomy to go ahead and do the research, because there's that transparency and it's that contract, it's that back and forth between the public money, the public, and the researchers doing the work. So that's one reason why Metascience is important, because it's looking at the overarching how these systems work.
Yeah, and I'd say at an academic level, if we think about the field of science, technology, innovation, public policy, we've often traditionally used at least as a simplistic way of describing these fields, this distinction between science for policy and policy for science. Goes back to Harvey Brooks. The idea being science for policy is how do we use scientific evidence in other areas of public policy, climate change, food, how we run the transport system, whatever it might be. Lots of work in STEEP in that area, science diplomacy being another example. And then policy for science is how do we organise, run, basically design the science system itself. One thing I love about Metascience, having worked myself over my career in both science for and policy, for science, is that it essentially mixes up and combines the two. So it's science for policy for science, and it means it's quite an exciting, in our own field as it were, within the sort of steepish universe, quite an exciting area of creativity and innovation, and one that I would encourage all of you in your time at Steep to engage with more. So thank you very much, and thank you, Helen.
Thank you. Cheers.